Hello. Thank you for joining us today and welcome. Good afternoon to those on the West Coast and good evening to those on the East. Kensington Senior Living has 7 unique communities, 4 located in Virginia, Maryland, and New York, and 3 sister communities located in California. Kensington is truly privileged to support caregivers and professionals from coast to coast. Kensington Senior Living focuses on relationship-based care built on the foundation of our promise to love and care for your family as we do our own. That promise was what initially drew me to become a member of the Kensington family, as my father lived there for almost 7 years. It is programs such as the one you are attending now that are so important for those of us walking through a caregiver journey to hear from expert professionals on keeping us current with the latest advances in care, management, and treatment of conditions that affect seniors and their families. Today, you are in for a special treat. Dr. Annie Fenn is an amazing chef and wellness coach. Her life pivoted from being an OBGYN when her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Annie was determined to change the course of this disease through nutrition. I feel honored to have known Annie for years and have prepared many of her absolutely delicious meals. The Brain Health Kitchen Cookbook was recently released, and it is a healthy cookbook as much as it is a book of phenomenal photography. If you're new to the Zoom platform, this presentation is in webinar format. This means your cameras and microphones will remain off and muted throughout the presentation. We will have a live Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. Each of our attendees today will be receiving a copy of the webinar, along with links to connect you with Kensington and the Brain Health Kitchen. Please share with friends and families. You will also be given the Mind Diet scorecard in the email, a link to that in the follow-up. Additionally, recipes from the food that Annie is going to prepare for us today. Annie, will you please join me and let's get started cooking and chatting. There is Dr. Annie Fenn. Hello, welcome.
Welcome to my kitchen in snowy Wyoming. It's really nice to be here. Yeah.
So we are super excited. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take the show away. You're going to tell us a little bit about the Mind Diet, and then we're going to cook some delicious things. I'm super excited about the quinoa brownies.
Oh yeah, everyone always is excited about the brownies. We were talking before I came on that I've been making these brownies over and over and over just to get them right. Not because we want to eat brownies every day, but I've been experimenting with different flours, and I really hope you all will like it when you try it at home.
I can't wait. And thank you so much. And I'll be coming back on for live Q&A. So everybody get your questions ready. Thank you so much.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hi. It is so good to have everyone joining me. Today, we're going to make 2 dishes from the book. And thank you for all those really nice things you said about the book. The Brain Health Kitchen. This just came out in January. So it's a relatively new release cookbook. And I think of it as more than just a cookbook, but also a guide to taking care of your brain. And 2 of the recipes in the book that we'll make is one is a whole grain pasta with golden pesto and greens. This is a really easy recipe, and it fits the criteria for busy nights when I really just want to have dinner ready by the time the pasta is done cooking. That's sometimes that's all we can do, right? And then I also have another recipe in here called smashed cucumber, tomato, and olive salad. And this is just a really fun way to make a fresh sort of a chopped salad, different kind of salads made from cucumbers, olives, tomatoes, and a little bit of mozzarella cheese, lots of good olive oil. So I'll show you the technique of how I do that. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the Mind Diet. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Mind Diet study. I'm sure that you've heard of the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is the dietary pattern that people from the countries that surround the Mediterranean Sea follow. And as you know, it's famously been studied because Mediterranean people are famous for their longevity and for their dementia-free longevity as well. So the Mediterranean diet had been studied from lots of different angles, but mostly through the lens of cardiovascular disease. We knew that people in the Mediterranean had less heart attack and less strokes as they got older. So some researchers started to ask the question, What about brain health? What about if you follow the Mediterranean diet? Does that mean that you are less likely to get Alzheimer's or dementia? So a group of researchers at Rush University, they put together a group of participants, over 800 people in the greater Chicago area. And they looked at them through their dietary habits based on what they called the MIND diet criteria. Now, the MIND diet is a brain healthy spin-off of the Mediterranean diet. We know that the Mediterranean diet is good for longevity, it's good for cardiovascular risk reduction, and the MIND diet strived to make it even more brain specific, okay? And a couple of ways they did that is by describing 10 brain healthy food groups, one of which is a food group known to be extremely good for the brain, berries. Berries has independent studies that show that they help people with memory tasks as they get older. We have individual studies on women over the age of 60, actually better cognitive performance if they ate 2 servings of blueberries a week. So it's this whole pile of independent data showing that berries are particularly good for the brain. Another food group that the MIND diet singled out was leafy greens. And that's based on MRI data that shows that people who eat a salad, a generous sized salad most days, they actually have better brain health as they age than people that don't eat any leafy greens at all. So there are a few key differences from the Mediterranean diet to the MIND diet, but basically they very elegantly broke down the food groups into 10 brain healthy food groups: berries, leafy greens, other vegetables, nuts and seeds, which we're going to be including a lot in our pesto tonight, whole grains, we have whole grain pasta, and we have quinoa brownies, that's a whole grain. Olive oil is a food group in the MIND diet study. Beans and legumes is its own food group. Sorry, I have to attend to my quinoa. So we have berries, leafy greens, whole grains, vegetables, olive oil, nuts and seeds, legumes and beans. Red wine famously was one of the brain healthy food groups in the original MIND diet study, but there's been some data since 2015 when that study came out, so it has since been dropped. And fish and seafood is an important food group in the MIND diet study, as is poultry. So those are the basic 10 food groups. The MIND diet researchers also looked at the 5 food groups to limit or avoid. And these are the foods that include, too much saturated fat. We know that fat is really healthy and important for good brain health, but it's important to have the right kind of fat. I like to think of them as brain-friendly fats. And the brain-friendly fats are the ones you get from olive oil and avocados and nuts and seeds, but less so much of the ones you get from, say, red meat or dairy, cheese, butter, things like that. And so the foods groups to limit or avoid in the MIND diet include fast food and fried food, ultra-processed food, pastries and sweets, butter and cheese. I mean, there is some cheese and butter that's allowed, but not as much as in the typical American diet. And red meat is also limited. So what we have with the MIND diet is a move towards more of the brain-friendly fats, the ones that are monounsaturated or polyunsaturated, less of the saturated fats, more of whole foods, less processed and ultra-processed foods, less sugary foods, less sugary drinks, less sugar sweetened, cereals, anything comes from a box or a can that includes sugar. Those are really, limited in the MIND diet study. I'm going to go ahead and drain my quinoa. So I'm going to show you how I make quinoa. Step 1 to making the brownies is to cook a batch of quinoa. There's a couple ways to do it. If you've made quinoa at home, you've probably measured the water, measured the quinoa, put it in a pan, brought it to boil, and then steamed it like rice. And that's completely fine. But this is an easier way. You just throw some quinoa in a pot of boiling water, just like you're cooking pasta, and then you set a timer for 12 minutes. And when it's done, it's all fluffy and it has like a little tail on the end, and then you strain it. So that's what we're going to do. We'll let that dry out a little bit while we make the brownies. Now, going back to the MIND diet, the Rush University researchers followed this group of over 800 people for 4.5 years. And these are people with healthy brains, okay? When they went into the study, they did not have dementia, but they were middle-aged and older adults. So they were certainly entering age groups where dementia and Alzheimer's could be diagnosed. So what they did was they followed them very closely with cognitive testing, with dietary diaries. They did a really good job keeping track of what they ate and how closely they adhered to the Mind Diet guidelines. And they also looked at all the other factors like, do they smoke? Do they exercise? Do they have a family history of Alzheimer's disease? Those things to try to control for those factors. And at the end of 4.5 years, what they found was astounding. I mean, they knew that the Mediterranean diet would perform really well when looked at through the lens of preventing Alzheimer's. They had a feeling that the Mind Diet would outperform the Mediterranean diet because of the inclusion of berries and leafy greens and a few other things. But they didn't predict that this group of people who followed the Mind Diet most closely would have 53% lower risk of Alzheimer's at the end of the study. And that's just in 4.5 years. That's in a very short time. 53% less risk was completely astounding. It was, it made a big splash when it came out in 2015. And yet some people are still not really aware of the study. Another cool thing about this study, is the people that follow the Mind Diet, not very rigorously, because it's hard to change dietary habits. Anyone who's tried to do that knows that it can be really hard to change your habits. But some people, they tried, but they only adhered to the diet about half the time. So at the end of 4.5 years, they still had 37% risk reduction in Alzheimer's disease, which is remarkable. I mean, we don't have any intervention, any drug, any vitamin, anything like that we can actually say will reduce the risk of getting Alzheimer's to this degree. And the Mind Diet is a very simple approach. It's a matter of eating more foods from the brain healthy food groups, less foods from the foods that we want to limit or avoid. And it's, it stood the test of time. Now, the Mind Diet has been replicated in other countries. It has also been found to reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease, which is really, really important because we don't have a lot of data on lifestyle interventions to reduce Parkinson's disease. And this was found to be particularly important in women who are at risk for Parkinson's because they had a family history of it. It's been shown to reduce the risk of breast cancer. Another astounding thing that just came out of the literature this year is that following the Mind Diet, adhering to it closely, can reduce the risk of breast cancer in a woman's life by 50%. They also looked at the Mind Diet in terms of reducing age-related open-angle glaucoma, a very common problem in elderly people. And the risk reduction for glaucoma was around 60 to 70%. So we're finding that the Mind Diet is not just good for brain health, it's really good for so many chronic diseases, even cancers that afflict people as they get older. Now, the Mind Diet study, the original one in 2015, was an observational study, meaning you take a group of people and you follow them for 4.5 years, and then you see how everybody ends up. Now, the Mind Diet trial is an ongoing study. This is like Mind Diet Part 2. And what they're studying now, and it's almost done, we should get results hopefully this year or next, is they looked at 300 people following the Mind Diet, 300 people following another diet. And nobody really knows what they're being tested for. So it's blinded, and there's a placebo group, okay, which really will increase the power of the findings. And at the end of 5 years, they will compare how these two groups did in terms of their dementia and Alzheimer's risk. They'll also use some other tools in this study that will increase the sensitivity of all the testing, like MRI data, looking at how the brain shrinks with age based on brain volume. And also they'll be looking at people's ApoE4 genetic mutation, which is a genetic mutation that could increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So Mind Diet Part 2 is due to come out anytime, and I'll be sure to alert everyone about the findings of that. For now, the Mind Diet is really the best way we have to eat to prevent Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And Susan, I'm going to ask you right now if there's any questions right now that we can cover before I plunge into the recipes.
Actually, That's really nice. I have a question. If you can reduce Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, breast cancer and glaucoma, I mean, in upwards of 50%, if you add in the other things that can help us kind of fend off these dementias, if you add in exercise and meditation, would that increase the risky, increase your chances even more?
Yes.
Eliminate the risk, I mean?
That is such an excellent question. So now we're seeing all these studies now, and you've probably seen them in the news that like this reduces dementia, this reduces dementia. So we know that with this dietary pattern, with the MIND diet, you can get the risk down by about 50%. But what if you layer on other healthy lifestyle things like exercise, like good quality sleep, like building cognitive reserve, which is how you learn new things and train your brain to be active cognitively in later years. And what if you don't smoke? That's a big plus for your brain health. And what if you limit alcohol intake? Another huge plus. What studies are finding is you can reduce the risk by as much as 70 to 80% by layering on the diet with exercise and these other modalities.
Wow, I'm all in, but thank you. Go and cook and I'll pop back on for some more questions. I encourage the audience, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions too, please. Thank you.
Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me if you need to while I'm cooking. I'm just going to go ahead and get our brownies in the oven. So I have a lot of brain healthy treats on my website, Brain Health Kitchen, in my book, the Brain Health Kitchen book. But I really have a soft spot for brownies. And you probably heard that chocolate's good for you. And it kind of depends. I mean, chocolate has flavonols, which are plant nutrients that open up blood vessels, help with the blood supply to the brain, and also help combat oxidative stress. And actually one of the best forms of chocolate is good old Hershey's cocoa. You might have read that certain types of chocolate are contaminated with lead or cadmium. Hershey's cocoa actually is the least of your worries when it comes to these things. So that's nice. It's inexpensive, it's good quality, and it makes really good brownies. So for this brownie recipe, I'm employing some brain healthy swaps like I do in all my recipes. Instead of butter, I'm using olive oil. I have 2 eggs. I have olive oil. Instead of sugar, I'm using maple syrup, just a small amount, about 1/2 cup, which is a natural form of sugar that also provides some minerals like selenium and magnesium. I also have a teaspoon of vanilla, and I like the combination of like an orange flavor for my brownies. So this is optional in the recipe, but I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of orange blossom water, which is just really, I think, just so delicious. If you don't have orange blossom water, you could use orange extract. If you don't have anything like that, you could just grate an orange and use the zest of an orange. And that would be really good. That'd be super good. And then we're going to add some flour. Now the recipe calls for quinoa flour, which I really love. And if you can find that at your grocery store, go ahead and buy it, because there's so many different uses for it in your cooking. It's a gluten-free flour. It's made out of quinoa. This fresh quinoa smells so good. When you open up a bag of quinoa flour, it really does have that same sensation. But I couldn't find any quinoa flour today. So I am making this with spelt flour. Spelt flour is a whole grain flour. It's super nutrient dense. Another flour that I really like with these brownies is almond flour. You can also use hazelnut meal. Really, really delicious. So I'm going to add 3/4 cup of flour and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Go ahead and add our cocoa powder and 1/2 cup of dark chocolate chips. I also add a little bit of water to make the batter, nice and easy to pour. This reminds me of making brownies from a box when I was in high school, where they tell you to stir it for 45 times. But you don't need to stir it nearly that long. It comes together pretty quickly. All right, so I've got my brownie batter. And now we're going to add kind of our really cool secret ingredient is a cup of cooked quinoa. Yeah, a cup of cooked quinoa. I'm going to save a little bit aside to put on top because it's just fun to have crunchy quinoa on top of the brownies. And when that quinoa cooks into the brownies, not only does it give you a serving of whole grains, which is one of the brain healthy food groups in my diet, it also provides these like little chewy nubs inside the brownies, which I really, really like. All right, and then I have a brownie pan lined with parchment paper, and I sprayed it with a little bit of olive oil. And in we go. Now I'm going to head and put a little bit of quinoa on top. This is really just to make it look pretty. You can use red quinoa, you can use black quinoa. Just make sure that when you cook those quinoas, that they're really chewy and soft because they do take a little bit longer to cook. Regular quinoa, when you boil it, takes 12 minutes. All right, into the oven it goes.
Annie, a couple questions that just came in that seems appropriate to ask you now. What can I use since I don't like chocolate?
For a brownie? I don't think you want to make brownies if you don't like chocolate, but you can make, I have a recipe in the book for almond butter and tahini blondies. Does that sound good?
Leanne, I think you have your answer. Perfect. And then the other question is, does olive oil versus butter change the flavor of a baked item?
It does. It's a really good question. You know, olive oil has a savory quality, which I really like. You know, once you've been eating a brain healthy diet for a while, there's not as much refined sugar in this diet. There's hardly any refined sugar, and things don't taste, you know, you get used to things not being very sweet. So even with a dessert, like a cookie or a cake or a brownie, you really want it to have more of a savory nature to it. And so I really like olive oil to balance, like this brownie has maple syrup in it, and the olive oil works really nicely to balance that. Now, for most of your recipes, you want to replace the butter with olive oil. Start with a really mild flavored olive oil. You know, some are really peppery, like the ones in Tuscany and some of the ones in California. That might be a little bit too assertive, you know, for a chocolate chip cookie or something like that. So start with one of the more mild tasting olive oils.
And I will say that I've made your olive oil cake and it's one of my favorites.
Oh, thanks. What kind of olive oil do you use for that?
I use olive oil that I get from Napa Valley. It's my favorite. It's called the Napa Valley Olive Oil Company. And you can actually order it online. And I've always traveled up there because I'm from Northern California and it's one of my favorites. I'll bring some to you when you come out here in May.
I've heard of them. I would love to try it. Yeah.
And then one last question is, what's the advantage of using all the different types of flours that you just showed rather than just basic flour?
So I don't use all-purpose flour in my kitchen anymore. The main reason is that these refined white flours, you know, they're just devoid of nutrients. Everything I cook and eat, I want it to be nutrient dense. I want it to be something that's going to be beneficial for my brain, not detrimental. And, you know, most of the grains that Americans eat come from, like 98% comes from all-purpose white flour, which doesn't have any vitamin E. It doesn't have any fiber. It's really just sort of, you know, a shell of what the grain used to be. So it's just as easy to use a nutrient-dense flour. And I've got lots of ideas for swapping these in and, you know, having good success in your baked goods. One of the easiest swap for all-purpose flour is white wheat flour. You can substitute it 1-for-1 for all-purpose. It's got a lot more fiber and retains some of the vitamin E. So that's a good place to start. And then you can branch out using buckwheat flour, oat flour, spelt flour, nut flours like almond and hazelnut, and all the different flours that I talk about in the book.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll let you keep going. Thank you.
So the next thing we're going to make one of the brain healthy food groups. And I've sort of extrapolated that for our purposes to mean olives as well. Olives are actually fruits. They come from a tree. They're considered a drupe, kind of like an apricot that has a pit. And just like olive oil, olives are teeming with monounsaturated fats and polyphenols. These are two things that are very crucial for your brain health. So I love cooking with olives. And if someone doesn't like olives, I just will try to convert you. That's all there is to it. A couple things about olives. When you buy them, it's better to buy them whole rather than already pitted. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it's going to be better quality. Number two, the pitted olives, they soak up so much of the brine that they tend to be higher in sodium. And that might be important to you if you are watching your sodium content. Okay. So these are Castelvetrano olives, which are from Italy. And I don't know if you can see, let me move this back just a little bit. There we go. So one way I like to pit my olives is I just take a big knife and I smash it. And when I smash it like that, the pit's going to come out really easily. You just pull it apart. And this is sort of a torn olive salad. All I'm really doing is smashing and pulling them apart. Whoops, I need to smash that one a little bit better. The larger the olive, the easier it is to smash. And then I'm just basically pulling it apart. Super easy. Another way you can pit olives is if you have a cherry pitter, you can use that. It does a really handy way of pitting your olives. Of course, the pit tends to fly all over the kitchen. So there's that. So here I have about a cup of my olives. And these are the whole Castelvetranos that I pitted and just coarsely tore. Into the bowl they go. I also have some cherry tomatoes, which are, pretty decent tomatoes that we get this time of year. It's not the middle of the summer where I live, obviously, but these are pretty good. And they're going to be really good when they're soaked in olive oil. And then the fun part is we're going to use this cucumber and smash it into the bits. And you might wonder why I would want to smash a cucumber. Well, number one, it's a fun thing to do. But that's not always in. Number two, when you smash it, it gets all these like irregular little jagged edges to it, which is really nice for catching the dressing. And there's a lot of juice that comes out of it too. So what I'm going to do, I have one of those English cucumbers, which I really like because they just don't have that much in the way of seeds. They're very juicy, but not very seedy, which I really like. And then I'm going to take a big knife and I'm just going to smash it. I'm going to use all my body weight and just smash. And that tenderizes it. It kind of cuts it without chopping it. Oh, I need a bigger knife. You can use a mallet too. I'm going to use a big knife. There we go. And then we're going to add that to the pot. Once they're smashed, you can just roughly chop them into little bite-sized pieces. And they just give you these really nice, jagged pieces that are just really nice in a chopped salad. It also gives you a fairly decent upper body workout, which we talked about exercise. It's really important to get about 150 minutes of aerobic exercise in a day, but it's equally important, in a week, it's equally important to get resistance training and keep your muscles strong as you get older. All right. So we've got our olives, we've got our smashed cucumbers, and the next thing we're going to add is some mozzarella cheese. Now, I know I told you that there's not much cheese in the Mind diet, and it's true. The Mind diet researchers, they took a really strict stance on foods that are high in saturated fat, like butter and cheese. So the recommendations in the original Mind diet study is around 1 ounce of cheese a week. Okay, so You know, that's not a lot of cheese, right? Just as an example, this is an 8-ounce ball of mozzarella. I like mozzarella because it is lower in saturated fat than most cheeses. So this is 8 ounces. Okay, cut that in half. This is 2 ounces. So this is about, you know, about as much cheese as you would want to eat in the Mind diet in a week. So there's not a lot of cheese in the Mind diet, but there's some, so you can enjoy it. And if your cholesterol is really in good shape, then you may not have to be quite so strict on this one. The reason that they took such a hard stance on foods that are high in saturated fat is because these foods make our harmful cholesterol go up. And LDL cholesterol, when it's too high, is a direct risk factor for not only having a heart attack and stroke, but also cardiovascular disease. So here's our salad. There's plenty of cheese in that. It's going to taste really good. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of olive oil, a few tablespoons of vinegar, and a half a teaspoon of salt. Mix that all up by hand. This is something that you can make before dinner and just let it sit there at room temperature. It actually will improve with age as it sits on the counter. And it's also a salad that is good as leftovers. Works out very well to have this leftover as a lunch or a snack the next day. And you can see how these cucumbers just really soak up all of that olive oil, vinegar. That little bit of cheese is going to be just enough to hit the spot. Okay.
Annie, you spoke about cheeses. What about a goat cheese or a feta cheese? Does that still go into the cheese category?
Some people can digest, sheep and goat milk cheese better than they can cow's milk cheese. That's a separate issue. Okay. Like, I don't know, you may notice, like, some people will tell you that they can't eat cheese in the US, but if they go to Europe, then they can eat all the cheese and it's completely fine. It's probably because of higher quality cheese, number one, and a lot of it is from goats and sheep. So it has a different casein protein associated with it. Some people in the US react a lot to the type of cheese that we have. But the lower fat in the cheese is probably the best type for, kind of like, what you usually would eat, which means that, those higher fat cheeses that we all really love, like brie and triple cream cheeses, I still eat them on occasion, but I save them for special occasions. Like if I'm having a dinner party, I'll get a wheel of a really nice, creamy cheese from the farmer's market. I'll pour honey over it and I'll serve that for dessert. But it's different than the customary way of like eating cheese and crackers every day when you come home for work, or putting out cheese and crackers every time someone comes over. I don't really do that anymore. I enjoy my high quality cheese in small portions.
Yep. And can you use any type of olives? Arlene here loves Kalamata. Can you use any type of olives in that?
Yeah, you can use Kalamata. Absolutely. I like the Castelvetranos because they're big and meaty and green, and they're really easy to tear by hand. But by all means, use whatever kind of olives that you like.
Just make sure you have pits in them.
Variety too. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be back.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is make our pesto. And this is a little different pesto. It doesn't have greens in it. We're going to add greens to the dish, but not exactly in the pesto. I call this a white pesto. It's actually a Sicilian dish that is a family dish of mine, where you use a variety of nuts, like pine nuts, pistachios, and walnuts, with a lot of garlic, and you pulse it in a food processor until it's sort of like mealy. And then you cook it in a pan with olive oil. So it's gently cooked, so the garlic is not quite so sharp. And then it's tossed with either fresh lemon, or we're going to use some preserved lemon that I have from the last class I gave at Kensington. I still have my jar of preserved lemons from last winter. So we're going to toss that with pasta and Swiss chard. Okay, so let me go ahead and grab ingredients. Now, nuts are a brain healthy food group, and eating nuts has been found to be one of the healthiest brain healthy habits that you can have. We know from the cardiovascular research that if you eat a handful of nuts, like 4 to 5 days a week, that's about a quarter cup, your risk of heart attack and stroke goes down by about 40%. Astounding, right? And so they extrapolated that into the brain health recommendations when they came up with a mind diet study. So I use a lot of nuts in the brain health kitchen. I have a lot of alternatives to dairy products using nuts, because when you swap out a nut-based food for one that's made from dairy, then what you're doing is you're getting more brain-friendly fats into it, more monounsaturated fats, less saturated ones. You're also infusing it with a lot of different flavonoids. These are the plant nutrients that make certain plants colorful, like the pistachios are green. That's one type of flavonoid. Walnuts are famous for vitamin E. And this recipe calls for pine nuts. But when I got my pine nuts out of the freezer, I didn't like the way they smelled. They actually do go rancid quite easily. So I'm substituting cashews. And if you can't find pine nuts or they're too expensive, feel free to substitute cashews or almonds or pecans or some other nut that you have. We're going to take a couple cloves of garlic. Now this recipe calls for 10 cloves of garlic, which is a lot. But look how big my garlic is. This comes from one of my local farmers in the winter. Each of these is kind of like 3 cloves of garlic. So I'm going to go ahead and use probably just 3 of these instead of 10.
Annie, what if you have nut allergies? Can you substitute anything for nuts to replace that in the mind diet?
Yes. So the mind diet doesn't really talk about seeds as a food group, but in my book, I added that as a brain healthy food group. I think of it as a bonus group because seeds, and I'm talking about like chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, sunflower seeds. All of these are incredibly nutritious. You get the same fat profile and nutrient density you get in nuts. So seeds are a wonderful way to augment your brain healthy diet. They're also really high in protein. Like I'm very fond of hemp seeds. If anyone who follows my recipe knows, but you know that 3 tablespoons of hemp seeds gives you 10 grams of protein. Like that's huge. So that's like the amount of hemp seeds that I might sprinkle on top of a smoothie in the morning. You know, it's like super, super protein dense too. So not all recipes will work for an even swap. For example, I don't know if you could make this with all seeds. You could probably do it with pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. But I don't know if it would work exactly the same.
And would that be the same for seed oils?
No, seed oils are completely different. Such a good question because there's a lot of confusion about this, you know. For example, a lot of people are recommending seed oils because the seeds they come from are so good for you. For example, like sunflower seeds and safflower seeds and flax seeds. Why wouldn't the oil be so good? The problem with seed oils, and it's not like they're horrible or anything, but I don't use them in my kitchen. The problem is it requires so much processing and so much heat to get oil from a seed that by the time you get to that oil, you don't have any vitamin E left. You don't have any of those healthy monounsaturated fats left. There's some, but mostly what you have is these polyunsaturated fats, which in the process of heating become not so good for you anymore. So I don't really use like grapeseed oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. Canola oil is not bad. That's a decent oil for people. It's inexpensive and it has a decent fat profile. But I don't use a lot of these seed oils in my cooking. I use extra virgin olive oil, I use avocado oil, and I use some nut oils.
There was a question about the different types of olive oils. Do you have a preference? Extra virgin, regular, organic?
So I'm just grabbing the clients. Hold on.
Okay.
So there are different grades of olive oil, and the only grade that is really fit for human consumption, as far as we are concerned about our hearts and our brains, is extra virgin olive oil. Okay, so forget about all the other grades. Okay, they might be used in restaurants to, they might be like just inferior grades of oil that is used to sort of like make foods more inexpensive. So, but in your kitchen, extra virgin olive oil is what you should be using.
Okay.
And of those, I have two general varieties. I have everyday extra virgin olive oil, which is the stuff I get at the grocery store. Like say California Olive Ranch is one brand I like. It's reliable. What's another one? Partana is another brand I can get at my grocery store. It's from Sicily. This is a not expensive olive oil, but it has a harvest date on it. So you know that it came from a farm, and it's got some criteria on the label that shows that it's what it says it is. And then I have high-end olive oil. High-end olive oil is, you know, like a very special bottle from Napa, California, or something I would bring back in my suitcase from Italy or Greece or Spain. And the high-end olive oils, I use liberally in my cooking, but I try not to cook with them because you pay more for these olive oils because of the flavor, and the flavor comes from the polyphenols. Okay, they're very fresh. Think of it as fresh squeezed olive juice, sort of, very fresh. And, you know, it expires over time. So as soon as you open one of those bottles, you want to consume it as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and pulse our ingredients together. So I have my 3 kinds of nuts, and I have my big, huge garlic clove, as you can see here. And we're going to go ahead and put all of that in the food processor. And we're just going to pulse it. We don't want to pulse it into like nut butter. Okay. We want to still have some texture to it. Okay. Garlic first. And then we're going to add our nuts. Just like you make pesto in the summer, right? We're not going to add spinach or basil or anything like that. And then here I have a half a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of oregano, dried oregano, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of red pepper flakes. I actually put a little bit more because we like it a little bit spicy, but you can do what you like. And that's it. I'm going to warm up my olive oil. 3 tablespoons of olive oil in a pan. So like I said, this pesto is a little bit different. Instead of, you know, putting all the greens in here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to saute the pesto in the pan, which tames the garlic a little bit and also brings all these flavors together. The nuts, the oregano, you know, the red pepper flakes, all of those things. Two minutes on the brownies. Somebody might need to remind me. Now, when I heat up olive oil in the pan, I'm actually really gentle with it. I don't want to heat it up above its smoke point. You know, when you're heating olive oil and you start to see wisps of smoke, you know, come off of it, that means you've hit the smoke point. And that is not what you want, because extra virgin olive oil is just really delicate. You can cook with it and cook with it liberally, but usually around 375 degrees is the limit. So that's about the temperature when your burner is on medium or medium low, which is what we're going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and add my pesto. And it looks kind of like wet granola. I don't know if you can see. It smells delicious. It smells amazing. And we're going to add a little bit of preserved lemon to it. Now, these are lemons that I preserved in salt and lemon juice. And they often can replace the salt in a dish because they're a lacto-fermented food that's a little bit salty. but mostly they just add, fermented microbes, which are really good for your gut and your brain. The peel of the lemon is teeming with flavonoids, which are special brain health nutrients we get from plant foods. And best of all, tons of flavor. I think we made preserved lemons with our last Kensington online class, right? Which is why I have this jar. They last in the fridge for a year or more, as long as they are submerged in their salty brine, just salt and lemon juice brine. I don't really want to cook this too much. The goal here is to get the nuts a little bit toasty. A little bit toasty brown is nice, but you don't want them to burn, and you certainly don't want the garlic to burn. We're going to keep a close eye on that. Do we have any questions while I'm getting the brownies out of the oven?
Sure. We do. A couple questions here. Is the Mind diet like the keto diet?
No, it's not like the keto diet. So the keto diet pertains to getting most of your fuel, most of your energy from food sources from ketone bodies. Okay. And ketone bodies are made by the body when you don't eat. So intermittent fasting is an important facet of the ketogenic diet. The keto diet also eliminates quite a few foods, like eliminates simple sugars, which is a good thing. Eliminates carbohydrates, which can be good. I mean, there's junky carbohydrates like ice cream and chips, but then there's really good carbohydrates like vegetables and fruit. It eliminates grains, which can be good and can be bad. If you eliminate all-purpose white flour, that's good for brain health because, like we said, that's devoid of any nutrients. But if you're eliminating all grains, that's not good for brain health because your body needs, that food group. You need a lot of diverse, different types of food in your diet for your brain to thrive and get all the nutrients it needs. So the keto diet has not been shown to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's or dementia. Most neurologists I know are not fans of the keto diet. People do use it to lose weight and it can be very effective as a short-term weight loss intervention.
Okay, and I understand, one of our listeners understands that tea is good for you. Does that mean just green tea or can be any tea?
Tea is absolutely a brain healthy drink. Tea and coffee both have a lot of data behind them to show that they are good for the brain. Just adding the preserved lemon, and the last thing when it added these golden raisins. Like I said, this is a Sicilian thing where they use a little bit of sweet, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of pepper. This flavor profile is just very typical of Southern Italy. So tea, the most brain healthy tea is the green tea, but any tea that comes from Camellia sinensis, the plant that you get green tea from, you also get black tea from, you get white tea and oolong. All of these different types of teas come from the same plant, and they're all rich in antioxidants, especially catechins, which are a type of polyphenol that are really important for brain health. And then there's other types of tea, which are more like, they're not real tea. They don't come from this plant. They're more like tinctures, like say like hibiscus tea or ginger tea or turmeric tea. They might come from other things in the plant world that are really good for you, but it's not quite the same thing as tea. So I definitely recommend drinking tea if you like it. And if you like green tea, matcha is probably the most nutrient dense form of green tea. So here's our
brownies. The brownies, Annie.
Oh,
the brownies.
yeah, thanks. This is looking really good. I wish you guys could smell this. Dang. I love these brownies because they cook in 22 minutes in my oven. Which is kind of nice. And this is what they look like.
Oh my gosh.
Puppy on top. They're really pretty with like red and black quinoa on top, but I just had white quinoa today. So we're gonna let those cool over here. And
In your recipes, if you really need to limit your sodium or salt intake, can you just leave it out, or what would you recommend?
yes, I would. If you are on a sodium restricted diet, because you have high blood pressure or another condition that your doctor recommends that you be on a low sodium diet for, then you just leave the salt out of the recipe. And then at the very end, just taste it. And you can always add, a good pinch of a nice salt, like a sea salt, has a lot of flavor. Don't use any iodized salt. It just doesn't have any flavor. So people end up using too much of it. You know what I mean? And then just be careful with some foods that might be high in salt. Like we talked about olives and pickled foods like that. And then the last step for our pasta, besides making the pasta, is I have some Swiss chard, which I love Swiss chard because I think of it as like 2 vegetables for the price of 1. And because I always cook with the stems. This is how I store it in my refrigerator. If you put it in a glass of water, like flowers, it'll last a really long time in the refrigerator. And because it's winter, this is the size of chard we're getting. So it actually fits a lot nicer too than usual. So I have my pesto over there. My water is boiling for the pasta. And while the water boils, I'm going to go ahead and add these Swiss chard stems to the pan with a little bit of olive oil. First, I cook the Swiss chard stems until they get, nice and soft. And then I add the leaves. So it's sort of like a 2-part vegetable, and it's a 2-part procedure to cook with it. The Swiss chard stems, as you might suspect, because they have this bright, vibrant color, are teeming with brain healthy nutrients. Most plant foods that are really colorful, especially red, yellow, green, purple, and orange, have a lot of the nutrients that we want in a brain healthy diet. I've got my water boiling. All right, I'm ready to take some questions.
I have a question here. Do you have new ways to prepare meals with more protein and not a lot of carbs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of people do like to cut back on carbs in an effort to lose weight or reverse diabetes, or if you have a tendency towards pre-diabetes. It's a very, very smart thing to do. But you still need your protein, right? Protein is incredibly important, not just for brain health, but overall health. So what you want to do is, you want to make sure that you're not eliminating carbs from vegetables. Vegetables are just really important food group in the brain healthy diet. I recommend that you get at least 3 cups of vegetables a day. That's 3 cups raw, or about 1.5 cups cooked. It's not a ton, but it's really important that you do get that. And the most protein dense vegetables are the cruciferous ones, like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, spinach. All of these have a lot of protein, okay? And then there's the lentil and bean group. Now, these do contain carbohydrates, but they're such an important brain healthy food group that you certainly don't want to eliminate beans and legumes. You want to make sure that you include, a few servings at least a week. And they also can be very high in protein. Now, when you're limiting animal products like cheese and butter and dairy and red meat, things like that, you probably wonder, like, where am I going to get my protein? One dairy product that's actually really good to include would be yogurt. Okay, good quality yogurt that's unsweetened. This can be from cow's milk. This can be from plant milk, like almond or cashew. It can be from soy milk. And good quality yogurt, especially if you buy Greek style, it's very high in protein. Another food group that we already talked about is nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds are super important to include in your diet. And I would try to get as wide a variety as you can.
Stephanie just asked a question, does a vegetarian diet provide enough protein? And I think you just answered that.
Yes, you can get enough protein in a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet. You do have to be strategic and very thoughtful about it. We don't know if a vegetarian or a vegan diet is superior to something like the Mind diet. for Alzheimer's prevention. Those studies are still kind of being done. There's never been a study that compares all these diets head to head. As far as we know right now, the Mediterranean diet and the Mind diet, spin-off are the best ways to eat for brain health. But you can do it as a vegetarian, absolutely, especially if you're one that eats eggs. Eggs have a lot of protein. They also provide a lot of monounsaturated fats, choline, lutein, some of the things that you would get from, chicken or things like that that you don't consume.
And then this Dina uses olive oil and avocado oil and small amounts of coconut oil. What are your thoughts on coconut oil?
Coconut oil is delicious, and I use it sparingly in the Brain Health Kitchen. And the reason for that is that it's so high in saturated fat. It's 94% saturated fat. That's a ton of fat in the diet. And we know from studies that if that's your primary cooking oil, then it may make your blood cholesterol go up. And I'm talking about your LDL, your harmful blood cholesterol. And elevated LDL is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, as well as heart attack and stroke. And actually, every 1% increase in your LDL is significant when it comes down to your real life risk. So I wouldn't eat coconut oil every day. I would consume it sometimes for its flavor. Like, I have a couple recipes in my book that use coconut oil. One is a stir fry. Another one is a turmeric and black pepper granola. I just really like the flavor of the coconut oil with the granola. But I don't like brush my teeth with it. People just use it all these different ways. I don't drink it. I don't put it in shots. I don't put it in my coffee. Daily consumption like that could definitely have some problems with your cardiovascular risk factors.
And I will just give a shout out. I've cooked so many of your recipes from your cookbook, and they are simple, they are flavorful, and I didn't have to go to 6 different bizarre markets to get the ingredients. It's just so nice. And the cauliflower tacos and the black bean soup are like 2 of my favorites.
Oh yeah, I love the cauliflower tacos. I wish I had some right now. But this is actually quite easy when it comes together. Here's our pesto. It's the 3 different nuts, the garlic, the preserved lemon, the golden raisins. And then I just cooked up some Swiss chard. Maybe you just have kale around. Use what you have. Maybe you have spinach. That would be absolutely fine too. I do like the Swiss chard stems because of the color and the, like the meatiness that they provide. But use what you have or use what you love. And all we're going to do next is toss some really good whole grain pasta. This is the brand that I like. It's a US brand, but it's very, very similar to the types we get imported from Italy. It's made from whole grains, made from spelt. And so it's lower in the glycemic index than a white pasta. So we're going to go ahead and cook that. Toss it all together. We have our smashed cucumber salad. I mean, I could just eat that for dinner when it comes right down to it sometimes in the summer. That with some crusty bread and olive oil would be a really nice light meal. Or you could serve that along with some fish, or maybe you're just grilling some shrimp or some fish on the grill, and then you have a cucumber salad on the side. So easy. And then of course, brackets. This is cooking down really nicely. When the pasta's done, I'm going to save a little bit of the pasta water. That's the secret to making really good pasta dishes. I'll take, like a measuring cup and dip it in, and then I'll drain the pasta, toss it back into the pan with the chard, with the pesto, toss it all together, and then add a little bit of that water just to help bind the sauce.
Do you rinse your pasta?
No, never. I have to let Livy out 1 second.
So I just wanted to remind the audience that you will all receive a copy of the webinar to share with friends and family, and you will also receive copies of all the recipes we did today, a link to purchase Annie's cookbook, and also a scorecard for the Mind diet.
Oh yes, we can talk about the scorecard. So I put together a handy little, just sort of a handy cheat sheet for all of you. With all of the brain healthy food groups on it. The serving size is recommended. For example, the serving size for beans and legumes is a 1/2 cup cooked 3 times a week. The serving size for Something like vegetables is 1 cup a week. In my book, you'll notice I have more plants in it and less animal products. My book is sort of a plant heavy spin on the Mind diet, just based on all the research that's come out since 2015 that pertains to that. But you're getting the actual Mind diet scorecard. And what I would like you to do is just, put that on your refrigerator or even take it to the grocery store with you to remind you of the brain healthy food groups. Keep track over the course of a couple of weeks and just see if you're hitting all of these food groups. The intention of these cards is to make sure that you're not missing out on any of the key micronutrients you need for your brain. For example, fish and seafood is a very important food group for the brain because you absolutely need DHA and EPA, which are the essential omega-3 fatty acids that you can only get from fish and seafood. So that's a very important food group. But in the Mind diet, they found you only need 1 serving a week to get enough. So that's good news. Another important food group would be nuts and seeds, leafy greens. The recommendation is 1 cup a day. In my guidelines, I upped it to 2 cups because if you're going to have a salad, I figure you should have a big salad. And the fiber and the flavonoids are really good for you as well. So keep track of your Mind diet score, see how you fare. You may be right on track with the Mind diet, and that means your diet's pretty brain healthy already. Or you might find some things that you want to switch out. Some really easy things that you could do to change to decrease your risk of getting some sort of age-related cognitive decline or neurodegenerative disease later in life.
Well, what you said, if you can just do half, walk before you run, you still are decreasing your risk significantly.
Absolutely. Small changes really do have significance when we're talking about this topic of nourishing your brain and protecting it from future neurodegenerative diseases. Very small changes, just changing up like your cooking oils, for example, or getting rid of some of the processed foods in your kitchen, like all-purpose white flour, eliminated sugary drinks. That's a big one. Sugary drinks are detrimental to your metabolic health. They're bad for your brain health. And it's really easy to swap them out for something that's more delicious, like one of my mocktails or an iced tea or something like that.
Understood.
Yeah. Any more questions from the chat? I don't know if I can see it from here.
Nope, I think we're good.
We're good. Gosh, well, I live at a high altitude, and so my water is actually still boiling for the pasta. So I'm not going to show you the finished dish. I'll take a picture and put it on Instagram later. And
we'll also get this recipe in an email. So everyone, Annie, I can't thank you enough for today. I can't wait to make that pasta. That looks so yummy, and such good advice for our audience today on how to take little steps to make a difference. And I think that this will help so many. And the more that we can battle and fight brain disease and dementia, the better off we are. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Annie Fenn, and everybody have a nice evening or afternoon.
Thank you for all your questions. Take care now.
Take care.
Bye.